A week ago, the ceasefire with Iran was supposedly holding. Ships were moving again. Oil prices were calming down. Everybody could exhale. Then on Thursday, an Iranian drone hit a cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz. And suddenly, we found out exactly how solid that ceasefire actually is. Welcome back to the channel. Every day we take one story out of Washington, or, in this case, out of one of the most contested waterways on the planet, and we break down what it actually means. Today's story is about a single drone strike. But stick around, because this one tells you everything about whether this Iran deal is actually going to hold. So here's what happened. A cargo ship called the Ever Lovely, flying the Singapore flag, was leaving the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday evening when a drone hit its bridge. U.S. officials confirmed it was Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps behind the strike. No one was hurt, the ship kept moving, but the message was unmistakable. Iran can still reach out and touch any ship in that strait whenever it wants to. Trump responded the next morning on social media, calling it a, quote, foolish violation of the ceasefire. He said Iran fired at least 4 drones at ships in the strait. 1 hit, 3 were shot down by U.S. forces. Now, here's the part that should actually worry you more than the drone itself. This attack didn't happen in some random, ungoverned stretch of water. It happened right after the United Nations had started moving stranded ships out of the strait using a special evacuation route along the Omani coast. Over 100 ships had already made it out safely. The second this drone hit, the UN's maritime agency paused the entire evacuation, saying they need guarantees those ships won't be targeted before they'll resume. So, think about the timing. The world was just starting to believe this waterway was stabilizing, and Iran picked exactly that moment to remind everyone who's actually in control out there. Here's where it gets even more interesting, because this isn't just about one drone. It's about who gets to decide which ships are even allowed through. The current agreement says the strait reopens without tolls for 60 days, and Iran gets a formal role alongside Oman in overseeing traffic going forward. Sounds reasonable on paper, but Iran's negotiators have already said, on the record, that once that 60-day window ends, they intend to start collecting fees from ships again. One Iranian official put it plainly, the pause was something Tehran accepted just to get the deal signed, not something they consider permanent. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been telling Gulf allies the opposite, that no country has the right to charge tolls on an international waterway, full stop, and that this will never be an acceptable part of any long-term deal. So you've got the U.S. saying never, and Iran saying just wait 60 days. Those two positions cannot both be true at the same time. Somebody's going to have to give. And that brings us to the bigger picture here. This ceasefire was never really one document. It's a 14-point framework that ends active fighting now and pushes the truly hard questions down the road. What happens to Iran's enriched uranium stockpile? What happens to its nuclear program long-term? Who actually controls shipping through Hormuz? All of that gets hashed out starting in the technical talks at the end of this month. A drone strike, days before those talks even begin, is not a coincidence, it's leverage. Iran is reminding Washington exactly what's at stake before the real negotiating even starts. Now, let's talk about how this lands back home, because it matters just as much as what's happening overseas. Trump came into this deal selling it as proof of strength, peace through dominance, the strait under American control. But the polling tells a different story about how the public is actually receiving all of this. The most recent numbers from American Research Group put his approval at just 30%, the lowest that pollster has ever recorded for him in either term. Other surveys have him a bit higher, mid to high 30s, but every major tracker right now has him underwater, more people disapproving than approving, and that gap has been widening since spring. Foreign policy success was supposed to be the thing that turned that around. Instead, you've got a ceasefire that's already being tested days after it was signed, a toll dispute that hasn't been resolved, and a public that, by clear majorities and multiple polls, simply doesn't believe this leads anywhere close to lasting peace. So here's the actual stakes going forward. If Iran starts charging tolls the moment that 60-day window closes, that's not a minor technical dispute. That's the first real test of whether this entire framework survives contact with reality. And if there's another drone strike before the technical talks even begin, that tells you Iran is negotiating with actions, not just words. while Washington is still negotiating with statements on social media. I want to be fair here, because that's the job. A ceasefire holding for over a week, with shipping mostly resuming, real talks scheduled, and a path toward de-escalation, is not nothing. This is a genuinely fragile, complicated situation, and not every disagreement means the whole thing collapses. But fragile is the key word. This deal is being tested in real time, on the water, by the people who have the least incentive to let America declare an easy win. So here's what I'd actually watch in the next 2 weeks. Does Iran start enforcing tolls the moment that window closes? Does the UN evacuation resume or stay paused? And does Washington's public position, no tolls ever, survive contact with what Iran is already telling its own people it plans to do? Because right now, those two stories are heading in opposite directions. And only one of them can be right. If you want to see how this plays out, whether the ceasefire holds past the toll deadline, make sure you're subscribed because we'll be tracking it here as it develops. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think this ceasefire survives the next 60 days, or does it break down once the money's on the table? I read every single one. See you tomorrow for the next Daily Take.